windows, waking to jungle with colorful brooks, the travels of Billy Bob. Now, thanks to our new pioneers of the day, preserving the trails
through here, first of all, in 1765, exploring the Willaca River of Lakes, which will become known as the St. John's River in modern times. I came back again myself in 1774 on a little different mission, documenting botanical resources, cultural resources, and wildlife and soil conditions. And I hope to have that published around 1791. Some of you may know more about that, but as of 1774 today, I'm not sure, I'm hoping. The beauty about what I do in this area in my travels is I cover 4 disciplines. Of course, you know history and you know about my science, but I also am involved heavily with literature through my journal and also the arts with my drawings. So I cover those 4 areas, and you see some of my artwork in this room today. I'm very proud of it, and once again, I hope it gets published in 1791. With that, we'll go ahead and get this started. I'm going to introduce one of the organizers of this event, and actually the whole week, Mr. Ken Mahaffey. There he is.
I want to thank all of y'all for being here. And you don't know, this is our 6th symposium that we've done since 2013. So it's a rising new thing that we're doing, and it really is working well. I mean, we've been so lucky to be able to gather some really great lectures on our river, on our environment, on the history. So, you know, it's just really an exciting time for me because I learn something new every time I come to one of these things. But we're going to start out with something a little different today. I want to introduce Sandra Parks. She is the president of the Stetson Kennedy Foundation, and she has an award she wants to present.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm here today to present the Stetson Kennedy Fellow Man and Mother Earth Award to Mike Adams.
All right.
Now, some of you may know who Stetson is. Stetson is best known as a folklorist. He was Zora Neale Hurston's boss man in the Federal Writers Project, and the last living writer out of the 7,000 writers that were hired in the Writers Project. He's best known as having infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan for 4 years and bringing actionable evidence against the Klan that it lost its nonprofit corporation charitable organization status. Stetson is lesser known as his interest and advocacy in environmental issues. Now, if Stetson was standing up here, the first thing he'd tell you about himself is that he grew up not on, but in the St. John's River, eyeball to eyeball with the water moccasins. Because his family's big home up there in Avondale was right on the river. And in those days, as long as he got home by dinner, he could go anywhere he wanted. So he was a marriageable Huckleberry Finn out there on the river and loved it to his dying day. Stetson and I sued the St. John's Water Management District over the 6 million gallon a day drawdown that was proposed by Seminole County on the grounds that there was not enough time for public or space for public comment. We lost in the Florida Supreme Court, but now, unlike then, the public has the right to speak in a public forum. So if you were ever turned down in the past, you can't be now. We give this award every year to individuals who have shown outstanding leadership and contribution, and most of all, public quickening on the 3 things that Stetson worked for: human rights, the preservation of traditional cultures, and environmental kinship. Notice our choice of words. We don't talk about environmental stewardship as if we are some manager that has dominion over the rest of the natural world. But we are instead brothers and sisters of other organisms on this planet that we have an obligation to protect. Many of the people that we've given this award to, you probably know. The most notable of which is Bill Belleville. But we've also given this award to Dale Kreider, whose work you might know, to Willie Green for his work in folklore. But in giving this award to Mike Adams, we are hitting on all three cylinders. Okay? His work in interpreting and becoming the Bartram not only is protecting an important historical legacy of not only the state of Florida, but our nation in general, but he also quickens the minds and hearts of people. Now, I have to tell you, Mike, I am a school teacher. And I happened on one of his presentations up at Alpine Grove, and he was already talking when I got there, so I don't know how long he'd been talking. And as somebody who is quite familiar with 5-year-olds, I looked at a small collection of 5-year-olds right down in front listening to Mike. I thought, 5 minutes tops. 10 minutes if you're really lucky. But 25 minutes later, this man held these children in thrall as he did his adult audience, because he is able to quicken the minds and hearts of his listeners. It is our very great honor today to give the Stetson Kennedy Fellow Man and Mother Earth Award to Mike Adams. Mike.
Well, I don't know what somebody can say to this other than, how many people were you talking about? Wow, this is wonderful. This is quite an honor indeed. And I'm passionate about what I do.
We noticed.
Yeah, I'm passionate about what I do, and sometimes quite emotional.
We noticed.
Yeah. But I believe that that is contagious. And when you're trying to get an important message out to people, they can sense that. And they grab onto the ideas that you're trying to talk to them about, and it helps them understand it better.
Mike, we will continue to notice.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope to stay involved with this group for many, many more years.
Our first speaker today is someone that, if y'all have read any of his books, you know what true spiritualism is when it comes to dealing with our nature in our state. The St. Johns River just being just a beautiful waterway that flows the wrong way. But it's so important to our life, and we're here in Palatka because of the river. If the river wasn't there, I don't think Palatka would be here. But it's really great to be able to introduce to y'all Bill Belleville. He has authored 7 books of creative nonfiction themed nature and has contributed to 9 more. He's traveled widely on behalf of the Discovery Channel, including excursions to the Amazon and the White Sea of Russia, as well as the oceanographic expedition to the Galapagos, the Great Barrier Reef, Cuba, and more. I wish my travels were like that. He was a writer-in-residence at the University of South Florida for a year and has been honored with 12 national and statewide awards. Renowned author Carl Hyacin said, "Belleville writes gorgeously and straight from the heart." It is my honor and my privilege to introduce to y'all Bill Belleville.
Richard and Tom Halleck put together this wonderful book, Travels on the St. Johns River, William and John Bartram. They did a great job. Thank you, thank you. And they asked me to write one of the little riffs at the beginning. So if you don't mind, I will read part of that to you. Ironically, 2 years ago, I was diving the Great Barrier Reef. Now, it's difficult to imagine driving over a reef.
Is this where you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here is the forward from Tom and Brooke. I will read that to you. I'm not going to read the whole forward. Just part of it. No other continental state can match our Florida Peninsula when it comes to the biological diversity of plants and animals that exist here. When botanist John Bartram and his son William, also known as Billy, explored this new territory on behalf of the British government in 1765, they were studying a landscape that was virtually, they were entering a landscape that was virtually unknown, one that was closer to the subtropics in many ways. Bartram's correspondence had been reported on Florida, including John Lebeau and Hernando de la Escalante. But then, explorations were not driven by the sensibilities that men visited. Both Bartram wrote about early exploration here, and doing so helped provide the world with our first intimate look at La Florida of the late 1700s. These observations generally were woven into the broader stories of the American Southeast. Certainly, their descriptions also benefited from the fact that instead of using far more convoluted Latin descriptions, the Bartrams were among the first to use the efficient taxonomy newly introduced by the natives. That categorized natural organisms as genus and species. I first read Bartram thoroughly when I was preparing to write River of Lakes, a journey on Florida's St. Johns River. Now, I knew Bartram's reputation, but I hadn't really read his work thoroughly. My hiking partner, Dr. Steve Palin at Rollins College, who was a former priest, had a very spiritual understanding of what nature was about, and he said, Bill, man, you gotta delve into Billy Bartram as deep as you can. I said, if you say so, Steve, I will. And I did. And what Bartram appeared 50 times in River of Lakes, appeared another 30 or 40 times in some of my other books, including my latest one, Salvaging the Real Flora. Anywho, I am really honored to be able to talk about Bartram because he represents everything I came to know and to believe about what the fully actualized role of the botanist ought to be. And I came to the conclusion, after reading all Bartram's letters and everything I could read, that indeed, this is the guy that wasn't just in to collect a lot of plants and to draw them. He cared, and he cared in a holistic fashion. A holistic fashion when it applies to nature in ecology. That was the first real reference to ecology that we really had. And with that context, we came to understand that ecology had to do with the link between everything, plant, animal, landscape, and you start taking away vital parts of that link, it go away. So Bartram was nothing if not our first ecologist, and he also had a deep and abiding spirituality. I feel the same way myself. I go hiking by myself. I sit under a cypress tree, and I feel all the goodness, all the spirituality that washes over me. Very, very powerful. I've worked on a few documentary films for PBS as well as PBS nationally. Also worked for a couple of Discovery Channel projects. I learned a lot. At the very least, Discovery Channel can open doors that maybe I couldn't open all of myself. Anywho, I'm really, really happy about the Bartram Frolic. I'm very happy that so many good-hearted people came out today. This is probably the most important thing we should know. And the real example of sustainable management of all of our natural systems was the springs that Bartram identified when he was here. We now know just about all of our springs enjoy an upland recharge area. We get the rain, and the rain is unencumbered. It percolates down to the sandy soil that in days past had been an ocean sandbar. It may percolate down 50 or 100 feet and then find or encounter rather the actual coarse limestone, a very young limestone, only very easy to penetrate. And at the bottom, from the recharge area with the sand to the place where the springwater comes out at the very bottom because of gravity. That can be 75, 100 feet away. But if you just find out it's all a string that is declining in magnitude and increasing in interest, it's because that the so-called spring set where the rainwater percolates down into the terrain. That spring set filled with something going on. Somebody will have tried to manipulate it in your development or to pump enormous amounts of spring water out. I'm incredible because the Native Americans who were here long before Bartram, they understood in a very visual way the importance of spring, and they kept them as sacred. There's a few of us that do feel springs are sacred. Unfortunately, there is not enough. And I would love it if we all joined in the larger food movement to sustainably keep our springs alive and to keep them fresher and clean. I think Billy Bartram would appreciate that. We're going to do Q&A now right there.
Pardon me?
Oh, you're going to do Q&A now right there.
That's fine, if you'd like, sure.
Okay, guys, if you have any questions, now be the time. Put up your hand.
All righty.
No question, okay. If at the end of our other three distinguished speakers, if you do have any questions, let all of us know. Thank you very much for coming, guys.
That he chose, paddling by day on its banks, he would doze, waking to jumble with colorful prose, the travels of Billy Bartram. Now, thanks to our new pioneers of the day, preserving through trails, tales and stories that say the wonders of nature that still mark the way of the travels of Billy Bartram, of the travels of Billy Bartram, of the travels of Billy Bartram.
At this time, Clay Henderson serves as the Executive Director of the Institute of Water and Environmental Resilience at Stetson University, which utilizes faculty and student research to inform policy options for significant environmental issues. Previously, he served as Senior Counsel at the national law firm of Holland & Knight, LLP, practicing in the public policy section in the field of environmental law. He also served as President of the Florida Audubon Society and was elected to 2 terms on the Volusia County Council. Henderson has long been engaged in the environmental policy in Florida. He served on the 1998 Florida Constitutional Revision Commission and sponsored most of the environmental provisions in Florida's Constitution, including the creation of the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Job well done. That's very important. He co-authored the Florida Water and Land Legacy Initiative, the largest conservation funding program our nation's ratified in 2014. He was also a leader in the development of Florida's signature land acquisition programs and negotiated the acquisition of over 300,000 acres of conservation land. Yeah, amazing. One man has a lot of power. Henderson has been recognized for his body of work, including the National Public Service Award from the Nature Conservancy and the Bill Sadowski Memorial Award from the Environmental and Land Use section of the Florida Bar. This time, I introduce to you Clay Henderson.
Great to be here. A couple of things I want to say before we get started. First of all, it's a great honor to follow my dear friend Bill Belleville. Bill is very much a hero of mine. I've known and worked with him over a 25-year period of time. One of the great, I would say, honors, privileges I had was to review 3 of his manuscripts, literally in typewriter written pages in shoe boxes before they went to press. And I always hated doing that because that's when I knew I was incapable of writing anywhere near that good. I always wanted to be a writer, but Bill, he knows how to do it. And that was always a great privilege. The other thing is that I think that Bill and I got our affection for Bartram at about the same time. When I was at Audubon, he had the idea and got some funding to be able to do a film on retracing Bartram's trip up the St. John's, and it was a pleasure of mine to be with him for a good bit of that. We read Bartram along the way. We identified sites along the way. It was a tremendous film. I don't know if we could still find it, but it would be great because you could see what we looked like 25 years ago. And that was a real joy. So, what was the name? I'm not sure. We'll find it. But the point is, a lot of that ended up in River of Lakes, and so a lot of the narrative that we found along the way, and a lot of the references to Bartram, ended up in River of Lakes, and I can attest to the fact that Bill, in wanting to be totally authentic, decided to camp at the spot where Bartram spent the night in the infamous Battle Lagoon. I don't think he climbed a tree that night, but I can tell you, because I was there, that the number of alligators has not diminished in 250 years. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge 2 people. One is here and one is not. Stephanie in the back with the camera. You're going to see a good bit of her art, and I was not able to put this together without her help. And one of my colleagues, Tony Abbott, who would have been here but for death in his immediate family. And Tony is, we talked about aficionados and scholars. Tony is the scholar. I'm the aficionado. I don't claim to be the scholar. I'm the aficionado. So, and a lot of what we're talking about today was work that Tony put together in his sabbatical. What I'm going to talk about is I'll give you greetings from your friends to the south in Volusia County, who've been inspired by your work here. And we are hoping and hope that next year we'll be able to, in effect, complete or continue leadership that you've shown here and expanding the Bartram Trail to the south. And then I'll have the editorial comment to the south in Volusia County, where all the really cool things happen. Where all the really cool things happen in Bartram headed south. So we're looking forward to that, and looking forward to being able to introduce him to a good group of people. My only claim to fame, by the way, is that when National Geographic did the story of Bartram in a 2001 edition, I was the boat driver. Okay, so my job, it was just fun to be part of that. Again, like what we did with Bill, we recreated a good bit of the Bartram trip up the St. John's River, and the writer here, Glenn Olin, he insisted on doing the same thing. He wanted to spend the night in Battle Lagoon and be able to write about that. And so we pulled we didn't do it in a canoe. We did it in one of those, big old fancy houseboats that we rented down in DeLand. But we pulled in there to Battle Lagoon, and we dropped the anchor and had dinner, had a few drinks, spent the night, and it was all calm until about 2 o'clock in the morning, when you folks around Plaquemine, you'll know what I'm talking about. 2 o'clock in the morning, we're all wide awake because that damn fuel barge from Jacksonville was coming down the river. It had gotten out of the channel, and all of a sudden we're looking out the window, and here's this barge right on top of us, and we get up and we just start yelling, you know, and finally the guy, you know, pulled right around. He missed us by a little bit, and then went on. But and Glenn in the article described that as the worst National Geographic experience. Okay, but the cool thing was after it all settled down and after the barge left, we all took out our flashlights and we showed our flashlights all the way around the houseboat. And if you've ever seen that John Moran photo of all those little gold eyeballs looking back at you, that's what we saw. We saw the exact same thing that Billy Bartram saw that night, that he wrote about and drew about and captured the imagination of people all over, including this little piece of art over here. So this is my little attachment to all of this. So let's see. So again, connections to Volusia, just for what it's worth. You guys take all this wonderful credit for Spalding's lower store. We had Spalding's upper store. And yeah, that's right. And we still don't know, by the way, there's absolutely no consensus for what the origin of the term Volusia is. But what Volusia became was after the Spaldings ran out, and it was still the trading post there on the river, the town of Volusia started appearing on maps in the early part of the 19th century. And so so in that period of time, that little settlement in New Smyrna were the only places in what's now Volusia County. And I'm a Volusia County boy. I'm a New Smyrna boy. And so, and I practiced what we call dirt law for the longest time. Everybody in New Smyrna started out doing real estate law. And actually, that was my introduction to Billy Bartram. Because back in those days, you know, we had an abstract office, and there were all the old deeds, and there were the surveyors. And in New Smyrna goes all the way back to the 1760s. And so all of our original deeds, so my house and everybody else's house in downtown, goes back to those early English land grants, okay? And all of us who practiced dirt law in New Smyrna knew one thing. All the titles were screwed up, totally. Okay, the surveys didn't work. They didn't. What we say in the business, the surveys didn't close. The monuments were in the wrong place. Okay, it didn't work. It was years later before, you know, things got better and it got straightened out. Do you know why they were screwed up? Because, you know, old man John Bartram thought that Billy was pretty worthless and kept trying to find him jobs. And so he convinced his friend, Gerald DeBrom, who had been given the job as Surveyor General of Florida, to go down to New Smyrna, which was the only place south of St. Augustine, and do the surveys. He was totally incapable of doing that job. And so to this day, all of the early surveys, all the early monuments of those early British land grants, they're all in the wrong place. And it's all because of, he was more interested in drawing pictures of flowers, and in this case, and actually one of the wonderful things he did was describe everything that was on Turtle Mound. And so, you know, that comes back to part of the value of his work, is you can go back and you can look at everything that he described in a certain place and compare it to today and see how things have changed. So that's how we got our start. We met each other through surveying errors. And in the county, we do celebrate Bartram in a number of ways, including this portrait that is in the old historic courthouse in DeLand, which is the Jackson Walker portrait of the flower hunter working his way up the St. Johns River. And it again is something that we pretty much value. So I give you that as greetings from your friends to the south, where all the cool stuff happened. Okay, that's right. We have we also have an interesting thing, and we have both everybody knows East Volusia, Daytona Beach, the speedways, Sin, Sex, and Sand, or whatever it is, and over on the west side, we celebrate a different kind of Florida. We celebrate the river, we celebrate our history, our heritage, our natural environment, and a lot of this we see through the Heritage Lakes Corridor, which basically follows the St. Johns River, follows the railroad tracks, and it lets us tell this story, this history of why West Volusia is indeed a special place. It's also, part of the scenic highway system is the theme for our heritage tourism, and we tell the story. We tell the story of the history of West Volusia, and part of that story is, of course, the first people who came upriver, including William Bartram, who described this beautiful place to the rest of the world. We're really in the process of some very aggressive and interesting trail systems that we're putting together with, which we hope that the Bartram Trail will be part of this. The first part of this is just a really nice bike trail that at this point is now running over about 50 miles of pavement, and the part of West Volusia really does go from it's going to go from DeLeon Springs all the way down to Gemini Springs before it's completed, and it also connects to a bunch of hiking trails and all these things along the St. Johns River. You can, in a sense, you can get some of that feel. And so it's going to be a great opportunity for people to get out there and do this. There's going to be interpretive signage, and there is already that sort of coming together, telling the history and telling the story of these connections. And one thing that the county's done very well is try to pull all these trails together in an app that tells you where you are and where the history is and the story. And we're very much hoping that the completion of our Bartram work will end up here. And I say it's a hope. It's not there yet, but we're working on that. So, by the way, I'm sorry, I lost this. It went back. You did see the logo. You saw the logo, right? I'm sorry, but in my business, the legal business, not the academic business, plagiarism is the highest form of flattery, okay? That's right, that's right. So y'all got a great logo, and we stole it from you. And we put Volusia on there because we put Volusia on there, you know why? Because that's where all the cool stuff happens. So this is the brochure. Now I've got them. We've got Stephanie. You're going to be she's going to hold up where we want to make sure you get one of these. It tells the story, tells the significance of what you know. We've got a map in there that tells some of these wonderful sites. Of course, you see we lead off there with Battle Lagoon because that's really the cool thing, and then it's got the map and the location and all these wonderful things along the way. Tell a little bit about Bartram, and so it's a great way.
I can say for just a second.
You can.
This was a partnership with Stetson. Stetson joined River of Lakes Heritage Corridor Group, the byway. So this is the byway map, like the red line is River of Lakes Heritage Corridor, and a lot of the Bartram sites are off-road, as you know. They're kind of, so what we did was we put a list of byway sites like docks and trails and parks, places people can park. And then at the top is all Tony's scholarly Bartram quotes and information about the Bartram sites on the map. And so you can orient yourself when you're traveling the byway to visit the Bartram sites.
There you go. So that's why she's here. Again, this is going to be a little bit redundant, but see here a list of the cool sites that are within our sort of area. Now I know that we share a little tiny bit of Lake George with Putnam County, and actually Lake County and Marion County, but you can't get down through the river without going through Lake George, which he called the Little Ocean. And if you've ever taken a little boat across that big lake, you know why I called it a Little Ocean. Mention Spalding's upper store with the Bartram trail marker that is there next to this great live oak that, was, when you look at a live oak like that there, and there's he went past this tree, and that tree was there, okay? That tree was there back then. That's just part of the connections. Battle Lagoon, which we talked about and we celebrate, and such a wonderful place. The place where he described the Ixia is right actually pretty much across from Battle Lagoon. Another is where's Hantoon Island State Park, where he describes coming around Hantoon Peninsula in great detail. And then on to Blue Spring, which interestingly he described as a vast fountain of warm or rather hot mineral water. And so we either wonder about what climate change has occurred in 250 years or what the hell was he smoking? We just don't know. We're not really sure. Gemini Springs, which is, I'm not sure how he found it, but he clearly describes what has to be Gemini Springs down into Barry. And of course, about 60 miles of the St. Johns River. We'll count all of it because in the earlier trip with his dad, he went almost all the way down, I guess, into Lake Jessup. So, but in the 1774 trip, turned around at Blue Spring. So, and the great part about it is you can have some of those same experiences. There are a number of truly wilderness experiences that still exist along the St. Johns River in our area, and we hope to be able to get people out there and be able to see what they're going to be able to do. Now here's our little contribution. This is if you look over here, that star. Here's Lake Beresford, what he called Long Lake. Here's the St. Johns River. Here is Hantoon Island. And we bought about 4 years ago at Stetson about 10 acres here on the St. Johns River. And this is going to be the site. This is a construction from last week. So you see we're moving along. We're not there yet. 5 of you asked where are we going. We're not quite there yet. But it'll be where our offices will be, the rowing team, but also the gardens. And so I know that's what a lot of you are very interested in. And the beginning of the paddling trail. I hope maybe someday we'll invite you all to go have a conference. We'll have a Bartram Symposium down there. We'll be able to accommodate everybody. We'll all get on the kayaks and relive the hurricane experience.
So where is that near?
It's on Lake Beresford. It would be on the way to Hantoon Island State Park. Okay. So we're going to have, ability to have community events, symposia, conferences, and the like. There's an outdoor pavilion where we can do things. We can have food. It's all this kind of academic stuff. And then we're going to be doing some of we'll be doing some of that boring science stuff too. Okay, but this is very much part of it. And what we convinced the county to buy in on this was the idea of doing this as a Bartram Gardens. And so having it as an interpretive site to be able to help tell this story and connect it to the trail system that is emerging with the county. In the site plan, this area up here is pretty much a forested wetland, and this is the area that we want to be able to convert into the botanical garden. This is a site from the lake looking back at it, so it's a beautiful, beautiful site. And there will be, this guy I love, he was posing as Bartram. I really like that. I think there was even a feather in his cap. But the canoe site there'll be a map to be able to show access to the other sites. You can go across the lake. Here's another historical mark to the crossing of what he called Long Lake, but to visit the Beresford Plantation. This is now within the Blue Spring State Park, but there is a county park over there. There's some trails over there, so you could paddle across and then be able to hike on that trail. Although I must warn you, I think there are more chiggers per capita on that trail than any other place that I know, and I know that from experience. This is a map that Tony put together showing some of the very famous Bartram sites that are within a paddling and boat distance from where our site is. So this is how, and there really isn't a good public access point to put in for canoe or kayak in this area, so this really does serve that purpose. We don't claim that this is the site where he took refuge before he paddled across, but it was somewhere to the north of Hantoon, and so we will take credit because as we said, all the cool things happen here. That's right, and we did this because we have a great system in Volusia where we have not only have acquired a lot of land for conservation, but we've also been able to augment with this with a tax-supported program that's allowed us to do enhances for historic preservation, environmental education, cultural experiences, and the arts. And they thought this was absolutely consistent with their overall mission and contributed to this. But on the site, what we want to do is, again, just follow along the lines of what y'all have done and bring back this art and be able to use it for not only for public enjoyment, but for telling the story, being able to, to link this with the landscape. In the gardens, we want to be able to point to a specific plant and show his drawing and then give his description of what that plant is as help of telling that story. Here's the hibiscus, here is the magnolia. Here is, this is a limpkin on the right. I guess this looks like a green heron on the left, so I apologize for that. But the amazing thing is that there are so many of Bartram's crying bird out there right now. I have never seen so many limpkin in one place in all my life. And in fact, this year is the first time I have ever seen a mama limpkin with baby limpkins paddling across the St. Johns River. I've never seen that before. So the crying birds are still there and they're still crying. And we'll tell birds as part of the story too, because I'm a birder, you got the Audubon connection. And I always tell people this is part of the story, that until the Bartrams came up the St. Johns River and saw all those birds, nobody knew where they went in the winter. And in fact, some of the learned scientists of the day even speculated that they might even fly to the dark side of the moon. No, they just came to St. Johns River. So to be able to help, tell that story. So the St. Johns is a great vehicle to do that. Bartram is the way to help tell that story and unlock those experiences for so many. And then just on a personal level, for me, I'm a guy, I'm into policy. And what I'm really into is how do we restore these special places to what they were like before we messed them up. And the St. Johns River is an example of that, our springs, the Indian River Lagoon, the Everglades, obviously. And it's hard to have a roadmap for how to get back there without knowing what the conditions of these ecosystems were before, the railroads and the steamboats and the people and the 1,000 people a day who are still moving to this state. And so the value to this day of William Bartram and why this is a book that finally got to print in 1791 and is still in print today is because it's value to folks like us that want to know, how do you put these parts back together? What did they look like before we messed them up? How can we try to instill some hope in restoring these important ecosystems? Wilderness is a wonderful thing. But it takes a little management to get that back wilderness to function the way it was. And I think if more of us can have that wilderness experience, the same kind of experiences that Bartram had and instilled upon us, that it requires all of us to then do what it takes to preserve and conserve this special place that we call home. So I've enjoyed the opportunity to be with you. Thanks.
PhD from the University of Florida. He's in the Department of Biology. He's got some very interesting shots and information and stories about alligators on the St. Johns.
Thank you. So I was going to try to talk without a microphone. Can you all hear me okay in the back? Okay. So a couple of years ago, I talked about Bartram and alligators at the national conference that was here in Palatka, and talking about Bartram's observations of alligators and alligator behavior, and our modern understanding of what their behavior is about. And so when I was asked to come speak to this group, I decided I'd do something kind of different from that in case there was a chance of redundancy here. And so I thought I'd just try to talk about alligators and the river itself, and talk about why and how alligators utilize the St. John's River. So there are a lot of alligators on certain parts of the river, but alligators utilize all of the river, whether you see them there or not. And one of the benefits of a big river system is that it allows easy mobility. It allows them to traverse great distances with very little encumbrance. And alligators are a species that moves a lot seasonally, in association with reproductive behaviors, in association with food and that sort of thing, and in association with the behaviors of other alligators in the population. They're very reactive. They're both proactive and reactive to other alligators in the environment. So alligators like the river because it's a large body of water and it's a permanent body of water. Many of the areas alligators live in, marshes and swamps and that sort of thing, may become seasonally dry or at least become very shallow and not offer the refuge or the thermal buffering that deeper bodies of water have. And so alligators, especially large alligators, like big water. They like water that's always going to be there, that they're not going to have to get up and move away from. Alligators are habitat generalists. They'll live essentially anywhere that there is fresh water. They do venture into brackish water. They'll venture entirely into marine habitats, but they have to return to fresh water. But they are not river specialists. There may be individuals that specialize in life in the river, but generally they are living in either non-flowing situations or situations with very low velocity aquatic habitats. Most alligators are in this kind of a habitat, a wetland, a marsh or a swamp, heavily vegetated shorelines around lakes and ponds, places that offer vegetation and refugia so that they can escape the heat and escape from other alligators and find ample prey. Alligators do live in flowing situations. They live in rivers. They live in low velocity situations like the Everglades, which is a river, but it's not moving quickly. They can move in faster bodies of water. They, at one point, they were quite common in springs and spring runs before we decided those were our places and took them over. And they're probably not prime habitat for alligators because they're cold water, colder than the average body of water. And but alligators are hard on one another, and so their subordinate alligators are constantly being displaced by larger, more dominant animals. And so if they can find a body of water that they can live in without being harassed by a big animal, they'll take it. But now they've been driven from these areas by people occupying them for their own pleasure on the weekend. We first came to know alligators on rivers, and by we I mean European explorers. The Spanish and French and English came here to claim the area for their sovereigns and to chart the coastlines of the New World. And so they moved up and down the coast, and when they found coastal rivers, they'd move up the river as far as they could, and in order to map the area, and they would encounter alligators in those rivers, and often in high densities. And so there are early observations of alligators in most of the large rivers of the southeastern seaboard and the Gulf. The Spanish moved up the Apalachicola and into Mobile Bay, and certainly into the Mississippi Delta, where there were large numbers of alligators. And so this was really when Europeans first saw alligators. And those first European explorers, the Spanish especially, the French, thought they were Nile crocs. They thought they weren't any different from the Nile crocs, which were known to Europeans for 1,500 years, from the writings of very early, like Pliny the Elder, and many Greek natural historians knew something of Nile crocs from North Africa, from Egypt, and so these explorers thought they were amidst the exact same animal, and they attributed the same behaviors to alligators, which are really pretty mild-mannered, shy animals, to that of Nile crocs, which can be pretty ferocious and belligerent animals as well. So the French came into the Atlantic coast of northern Florida in 1562, and worked along the coast up to the Carolinas, and ultimately were driven back here. And they explored the mouth of what they called the River of Maize, which we now call the St. Johns. They set up a small fort near the mouth of the St. Johns, which is Fort Caroline. And we have a number of illustrations here. Oh, thank you. I'll use this. They have a number of illustrations here from a French artist named Jacques Lemoyne. And these are the very first illustrations that are identifiable as alligators in the New World. And so this was really, it was right on the mouth of the St. Johns that this was recorded. And they were living with Timucuan Indians there. And I'm not sure Lemoyne ever actually saw this happen or saw alligators. These are huge animals. The natives are clubbing the animals, shooting them with arrows, and trying to drive these long pointed stakes in their mouth to kill them. But there are some oddities here. The alligators have ears. So I'm not sure he actually did a detailed study of alligators, but these were the first artistic evidence of alligators in the New World. This is another one of Lemoyne's drawings that has an animal here. They're smoking meats to preserve them, a large number of wildlife species, and I suppose this is an alligator in this. So we learned a bit about alligators. We learned more about Indian customs through those illustrations. The river, most of the rivers were the primary means of transportation before roads were built. Bartram used canoes to move up and down the river. Small skiffs were used. And as more people were trying to move into Florida or utilize Florida, we started having larger vessels moving up and down the St. Johns. There were steamboats or paddle boats. you could get on a boat in Jacksonville and get off and take a fairly short mule cart ride across over to Cocoa. So you could go a long way up and down the river. This was a steamer coming into Silver Springs, so they'd go up the Ocklawaha and work their way up into Silver Springs. And so by the 1880s, this was what people were doing. They were the wealthier Americans were coming to Florida to see the wilderness, and they were doing it from these paddle boats. And they were seeing alligators along the way. And there's lots of written accounts, many written accounts in weekly magazines or monthly magazines of traveling the river and shooting alligators for sport. And they wouldn't stop and collect the alligators. They wouldn't skin them. It wasn't for hides. It wasn't to get meat. They were just shooting them because they were there. There were lots of animals, and they considered this sport. It became so common that there are a number of observations of people on these boats blasting away at alligators that had already been shot hours or days before, and shooting an already dead alligator. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the alligators and their use of the river. And as I say, the deep permanent water is attractive to alligators, and especially to big alligators. Big alligators like deep water and open water. And by big, I mean big. There are alligators that are 13 plus feet in the river. I think there are probably some alligators in the St. Johns farther downriver than we are here that are bigger than any of the alligators that have been killed in recent times, in the last 50 years or so. These are old animals. They're quite knowledgeable about human activities. They're big and they're powerful, and they know how to avoid people. And so there may be sightings of them, but they're able to evade actual capture. And they like the deep water because it gives them a means of escape from humans. It gives them access to habitats all over the river. It gives them access to females for mating. It gives them access to food resources that are moving up or down the river. And large alligators use the middle part of the river pretty much exclusively. Smaller alligators, female alligators, don't tend to venture out into the open water. This is true of big lakes as well. Females tend to stay near the margins also. So we don't have a lot of studies of alligators in river systems. It's not the kind of habitat in which a lot of our ecological knowledge of alligators comes from. There are a few studies of alligators in flowing river systems, and that point that large males are really the ones moving out into the middle of the river, and the other animals are really sticking to the more heavily vegetated zones along the banks, the places where there's emergent vegetation, or they're moving out of the channel itself and moving back into the flooded forests and the marshlands around it. Those are really areas of the river that are being used by the majority of alligators. And obviously those areas offer denser habitats, more shelter, and probably greater access to easily captured prey items than the big, deep, open water of a flowing river channel would. And so, especially, this is on the Ocklawaha after the storms back in 2004 and 2005, are huge amounts of of trees came down in the river there, and the alligators just loved it. I mean, it was hard to get a boat through there, but it wasn't hard for an alligator to get through there, and it gave them actually more access to sunlight and places to crawl out and bask than they had had prior to the storm. And so, I mean, there were a lot of gators back in there after that storm. So these peripheral areas along the river really offer a lot of prime advantage to alligators, and they're very heavily utilized. Alligators are cannibalistic. Adult alligators eat smaller alligators. They'll even kill and eat other adult alligators, but they feed pretty heavily on small animals. And so once alligators have left the protection of their mother, the mothers guard the nest and guard the young and offer some protection to them, but once that is lost, they have to move into areas where they can find water, find prey, find shelter, and preferably an area that provides all that they need but doesn't provide what larger alligators need. And so they don't have to worry about coming into contact with big animals. And so these tend to be these really closed areas with shallow water. It might be ephemeral water, so during periods of drought they may have to get up and move, which is dangerous to them. But they seek out these margins. As water levels rise and lower, these animals are moving up and down through these habitats. But it also offers them access to lots of the prey that they need, smaller prey like grasshoppers and katydids and small snails and little frogs and mosquito fish and small snakes and all of that. That's what these things need at that time in their life. And that's where all those things are found, because if they move into deeper, more open water, that's where their predators are as well. And so it's a prime area for these small animals. Females will move away from once they've courted and mated with the males in the river, they'll move back away from the main channel of the river into these same inundated areas, the swamps and marshes, and they'll find high ground there. For instance, some of these bluffs that you see on the river right near the Battle Creek, and they'll nest up on those where they're protected, they're surrounded by vegetation, but they're not at risk of flooding. And so females move back into those same habitats to build their nests and watch the nests while the eggs incubate, and when they hatch, they'll maintain some control over the babies back in these very shallow areas. And the little small animals, when they do come from the nest, the female will wallow out a little area so that if it's completely vegetated, she'll use her body and wallow out the vegetation so they have a little protected bit of water. It's kind of surrounded by vegetation. They spend their first weeks or months in that area, and they can move around in this or move from it and forage among all that vegetation, but the female's usually nearby, and if there is danger, they can run to the mother, or they can vocalize, and the mother will come to them as well. So this is kind of preliminary, and there's not really a detailed study of this, but it appears to me that alligators that live in flowing river systems and pretty much live their life in these areas are morphologically distinct from the gators that we're more used to, the ones living in big lakes and marshes and that sort of thing. And these animals tend to be more slender and elongate, and their heads tend to be very narrow and very parallel-sided, and I think that makes them a little more hydrodynamic in flowing water, which they're being exposed to. And this may not be an adaptation to flowing waters as much as these big, wide, heavy flatheads are an adaptation to life in those marshes and swamps where their bodies aren't being buoyed by the water all the time, and so gravity is having a greater effect on that massive bony head, and it's just being flattened and spreads out over time in marsh-dwelling alligators. But the skull on the right is an animal from a river. It's a very elongate, very narrow-snouted animal. So we've seen this image constantly in this. The animal above is feeding. The animal below is in the process of bellowing, making these deep roars. In both cases, they lift their heads, they lift their tails out of the water. In the case of feeding, they use what's called inertial feeding or gravitational feeding. By lifting their head, they allow gravity to let the food drop down their gullet, down into their esophagus, and then they use body motions to move the food down into their stomach. In both cases, to get that head up out of the water, the tail has to come up as a counterbalance, because on a big gator, the head and the muscles, the bone and the muscles, can weigh 150 pounds or more on a really big animal. And so I'm using this as a lead-in to a discussion about using rivers as sources of prey, because unlike a marsh where the alligator has to lie in ambush or move around the margin of the marsh looking for prey, in flowing river systems, prey move up and down the river, often in very large numbers. And that's a pretty attractive feature to a top-level predator. And I'm sure if you've spent time on the river here, you've experienced this sort of thing, when you can have very large numbers of fish moving up the river or down the river, and when they come into narrows, they become highly concentrated. And there's this one quote that Bartram made about so many alligators being in this one area that if they would allow, you could walk from bank to bank on them. And he was, kind of universally ridiculed for these observations, but this is a crummy photo. It's actually a frame from a video somebody took in the Okefenokee of fish migrating through the swamp and really becoming concentrated in these narrows. And alligators find those fish and they start feeding on it. Other alligators hear and smell and probably taste what's going on, and they come in and take advantage of this. And you can get very high concentrations of alligators in these fish runs. And there are multiple observations of this in different areas. It's been seen on this river, obviously. It's been seen in coastal bayous in Louisiana, in which alligators are kind of systematically lining themselves near these, in that case it's schooling mullet, and they would charge in simultaneously and dive under and come up under these concentrations of fish, and then they'd move off and allow other gators to come in and do the same while they swallowed whatever fish they got, and continue this until they really were too full to manage to continue. And so in this river, the St. John's is an interesting river for many reasons, but it's a freshwater river, but it's largely spring-fed, and so the waters are ionic. They have high mineral content, and so it's not salt water, but it's ionic water. And a lot of marine species are able to move into this river, and they're physiologically capable of living in those ionic waters. And so these are mullet, and mullet fingerlings move down the coast from the Carolinas and Georgia, and they move into this river by the hundreds of thousands or maybe millions. and move up the river, and other euryhaline species, redfish and snook. There's sharks in the river. There, tarpon come into the river. It's a source of prey that is just not available to alligators that are living in a prairie or a swamp. You know, this constant movement of prey animals up and down the river, and the alligators in these areas know how to utilize these. Blue crabs are in the river for the same reason. This is an alligator that eats blue crabs. They're very capable of capturing and eating blue crabs in these situations. So that's really a great draw to almost any flowing water system. It doesn't have to be the great big St. John's. It can be a small stream. They can utilize that. So this is an alligator doing, and they have many different hunting techniques, but this is one we call weir fishing in a very narrow channel. And the alligator, if you can see this, the alligator is blocking the flow of the water in this channel. So there's a bank right here where the tail is turned, and then this is the other bank, and water's flowing in this direction. And I don't know that it's obviously a pretty crappy photo, but I think you can tell that the water is sort of dammed up on this side of the alligator. It's a bit lower, and the flow of the water has to be passing by the tip of the snout here. And so prey species moving downriver or upriver are having to move right past the jaws of this animal. The jaws are covered in little sensory pustules. They can feel that. But in addition, below this animal, downstream from this animal, there's an eddy. So there's a reduced current there, and fish will gather in that area because they're not fighting the current doing that. So you'll actually, just as they would on a trout stream below a large rock or something like that, they'll concentrate themselves right on the downstream side of the alligator. So if you watch these animals, every once in a while, they'll slowly bring their tail around and their head around, and they trap those fish with their body, and fish are jumping over the tail or jumping over their back trying to escape, but they're able to utilize that flowing water to their advantage to concentrate prey and be able to feed on those fish. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Have you ever done any studies on whether those fishing techniques are learned over age, or if they're passed on in some way, or,
I have, so the studies of fishing in alligators and other crocodilians are largely observational studies. But the same techniques, there's a number of techniques that have been described for alligators and for a number of crocodile species, and they often are doing almost identical behavior. So that makes me think these are really more instinctual behaviors. But Nile crocs will do this same kind of weir fishing. I've seen common caiman in Venezuela doing the same thing in little small channels. I think, though I have no doubt that these animals are capable of observing behaviors within their population and mimicking that or replicating that, I think those behaviors are probably, there's an instinctual basis to it. The thing about feeding behaviors is that, it's like when you're feeding your dog and we use treats to reward it. If they do a behavior and they're able to capture a prey, there's a positive reward, and so there's a tendency for them to magnify the behavior, right, over time.
What is the lifespan of the great big ones you were talking about that would live in the middle channels?
So it's hard to estimate lifespan for wild alligators. We generally say that alligators live in the wild usually 45, 55 years. we're probably underestimating that. There's a few studies. There's one long-term study of alligators on a coastal river in coastal island in South Carolina that have been working with alligators for more than 25 years now, approaching 30 years. And they have animals that were marked at the beginning of that study, and those animals are still there, and they were large adult animals at that time. So they're probably in their 60s or 70s. In captivity, there's an alligator at Steve Irwin's Zoo in Australia that's 87 years old this year, and there's another one in where is it? I think it's in Czechoslovakia that's the same age. So there's two females that are 87 years old. So I always say they at least potentially in captivity, they have a lifespan pretty similar to humans. Little girl? What'd she say?
Did you take?
Oh yeah, those are my pictures. Yeah, I've been doing this a long time, so every once in a while I manage to catch one.
In 1970, I went on a fishing trip in the Okefenokee Swamp with 3 other young fools. We were there for 3 days. The first day it was overcast and no wind, very still. I didn't see a single alligator, and I'm very disappointed. The second day was identical, overcast, no wind, and there must have been 500 to 1,000 alligators I saw. Do you know what might make that difference?
It's hard to say. They feel changes in barometric pressure, so they respond to the weather like lots of animals do. I'd have to kind of, even to make a guess, I'd have to know a bit more about it. Was it in the wintertime? Spring, yeah. So at that time of year, it's hard to judge what they're doing. They're spending a lot of time basking to raise their body temperature. So if there are weather conditions that are not conducive to doing that, they don't bother. You know, they're not doing a lot in early spring, right? Except for trying to warm up. So if they're not going to expose themselves to potential other alligators or other threats, if they're not going to at least gain the benefit of getting their body a bit warmer. So it's hard to say, but I mean, you do see a lot of patterns in the animals.
So the drawing that Bartram did with the smoke or whatever, vapor coming out of the nose, you're saying it's noise?
No, they do that.
Are there any photos or videos of that?
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen it.
Yeah, you do see it. They have to be pretty big animals. Yeah. It helps. So I've seen it many times. Okay. I think it's water vapor coming out of their lungs, and I do have photos of it. But it helps if they're backlit, like in the morning sun, because you can just see that vapor. It comes out of their nostrils. It comes out of the front of their mouth while they're bellowing, usually toward the end of that audible bellow. But it's real. And I don't doubt that it's actually happening with somewhat smaller alligators. It's just not of a volume where we can really see it. I'm sure if we used some refracted light or something like that, we could probably detect it. I think it's just water vapor coming out of their lungs. But I also think it's likely to be at least one of the sources of the Spanish myths of smoke-breathing or fire-breathing dragons in the New World.
I was just wondering about the effects of modern post-shooting off your steamboat hunting of alligators. You know, we live in Malacca and we see at night, guys out there with their gear and their guns and all that.
Yeah, so those fall harvests are part of the management plans to allow the public to have some access to the natural resources of the state. they don't kill a lot of alligators relative to the population size. They kill a few thousand a year that way. If you know, if I were the king of everything, we wouldn't do that, or we would. I would limit the size range of animals that they kill, because it's become a situation like high-end big game hunting, where there are guides that spend months seeking out the biggest alligators and learning where they are so they can take their clients out there. And those are, ecologically, those are the most valuable animals in the population. They've survived the longest, they've, you know, produced lots of young, and they control all the alligators of smaller size, and we're removing those. So that's one of the things I have great concerns with.
Great. Miss Linda Kreider has written you a song.
Oh, no. Well, this could be bad.
I traveled south toward Wilson's Cove one warm spring day on Putnam shores. My trusty kayak, my only companion among the ghosts of pine and cypress. Dreamily cruising along the edge, waded through reeds of springtime gold. Suddenly behind me, sound so alarming, I turned my head back to behold. Like a dozen boilers exploding at once, spewing steam in every direction. A tower of methane-infused river muck surrounded its former reflection. Then down with a slap came the dragon's tail, sounding my final warning. With heartbeat resounding, I sped from her lair, my arms with paddle churning. I dare not look back, though I lose my speed and fear the worst was upon me. If this angry gator emerged upright, spewing water and smoke beneath me, I had heard the tales and the stories of such in the travels of William Bartram, when not far from the spot, though 10-40, he described a similar story. So no more disputing, at least for this paddler, Bartram's alligator encounters. At a time when the St. John's was teeming with fish, why doubt his colorful stories? You can see by my telling this tale today, I survived that lovely spring morning, and wiser to seasons of courtship and nesting along St. John's River borders.
But currently he's retired faculty of the Florida Museum of Natural History, University of Florida. He spent most of his career exploring the landscapes and species of North Florida and the Caribbean. These experiences are described in more than 160 professional publications. He now lives with his wife, Melanie Wagner, at the edge of the Ordway Swisher Biological Station in western Putnam County, Florida. It's truly my honor to introduce a dear friend, Dick France.
Thank you so much. But before we get started, I have a tale. Kent and I go back to 1979 when he started graduate school at UF. He and I had to suffer with the same boss, Walter Offenberg. And Kent worked on alligators at the alligator farm looking at their behavior. And you know that big pond that has all the alligators in it? that you could walk across their heads. He would be in the water swimming around studying what they were doing. He was one of the alligators in the pond. So I thought I'd share that, because every time I go over there I think, he's nuts. All right, so what I'm going to do today, and it's really hard, it's one of the hardest things I've had to do, is to explain this book. I can talk to alligators or tortoises forever, but talking about how this book came together has been a challenge. But anyway, I wanted to point out a couple of things. Notice that this book fits in a gallon plastic bag, and it can be sealed, so it's not, when it falls overboard, it's retrievable. The book is exactly 1 pound, so it could be stuck in your backpack, and so it won't be a challenge with your back. As you get older, the back becomes an issue. But so that's what we're dealing with. Basically, when this started, this book project started, it was right during the meeting in 2013. And Tom Halleck and I got together with Sam as our cheerleader and insisted that we do something with Bartram on the St. Johns River. So 4 years later, in January 2017, it appeared and came out through the University of Florida Press. So I'm going to sort of talk about a little bit about what happened in between there. I do want to mention the participants in this endeavor. Tom Halleck is at the University of South Florida in St. Pete, and a wonderful natural historian, cultural historian. He's great. Anyway, Dean Campbell was our cartographer. He produced this incredible map of the St. Johns River, which included all the campsites and the routes and so on. And it was a total inspiration. The book couldn't happen without having that kind of treatment. And then Bill, who spoke earlier, did the foreword in the book. And I'd not met him before. Today is my first day meeting him, and it's such a great pleasure. Catherine Neville Parker, Neville for short, lives in Melrose. She's the editor that was the University of Florida editor for the book. I'm glad she lived in the neighborhood, because then I felt like she was a neighbor and I could go and hound her about things. And then there are the cheerleaders of Sam, Ken, Janice, and many brother gardeners, some of which are here, like Jim McDonnell and Carol McDonnell. If it hadn't been for them and their sailorship, I probably would not have seen the part of the St. Johns River that I needed to see. They don't let me around boats or hammers. Sandy Cokernewt and Jack Cokernewt, Steve Hale, all of these are part of these brother gardeners in my view of the world. Okay, a quick timeline. It all started in July 2013, and I mentioned that earlier. It went through the first drafts of that first year. Energy builds that first year, and then, but anyway, it actually happened, and in fall of 2016, I went on a trip with a friend of mine, Ken Dodd, out west, and every night when we were in the motel, I was putting together this damn index to the book. He still blames me for his trip to the west. And then finally, it was produced in January 2017. Okay, I was asked to sort of define what the purpose of the book was, and that gave me a lot of trouble. Okay, but it is a guide. It's the guide to the writings of Bartram and their experiences of the Bartrams, John and William, on the St. Johns River. We tried to establish a travel timeline in the book and interpret the travel routes, the campsites, exploration, and these two guys here were the leadership of that. And then to sort of update the cultural and natural history contributions. So that was what we were trying to do. Whether we were successful, that's up to you guys. This is the table of contents for the book, and it was organized sort of in an odd way. We divided up, Tom and I divided the book up into his part and my part, okay? His part was the journal, the diary and the journals and the writings of the Bartrams. And of course, Bill wrote the foreword. And then my part two, through their eyes, what I wanted to do there, I'm primarily a biologist, and you can't get that out of my soul. So I wanted to portray the natural history and culture when it came in that the Bartrams encountered. And then, of course, part two has a very different kind of lint to it than the first part of the book. And we also decided that we wanted to keep the book small. We wanted to keep it usable. People take it with them, not something like Francis Harper's book that's that thick. So what we did was concentrate on the St. Johns River, and we went west to the Cowpen Lake area, and that's where we cut. William Bartram went much further than that, but we decided we're going to do the St. Johns River. The Bartrams, for whatever reason, never went up the Ocklawaha River. That's a mystery to me. But anyway, so we do not include the Ocklawaha River in our story because the Bartrams didn't visit it. They got close when they were crossing Deep Creek, heading toward Cowpen Lake. They were probably within a mile of the Ocklawaha River. And why didn't they? It doesn't make sense.
Beats your point.
Exactly. Okay.
I can tell you what, you remember, first of all, if you remember John Bartram, if you know about his relationship with the Indians, it was acrimonious at best. John Bartram's dad had been killed by the Indians, and there was no love lost. You remember they had attended the Indian conference at Piccolata just before they left. At that conference, the purpose of the conference was Governor Grant was discussing with all of the Indian leaders what was going to be the territorial divide between the Indian territory on the west and what would be available to the white settlers. And the Ocklawaha was the end point. So the dividing line goes directly from Spalding's Lower Store. If you draw a straight line from Spalding's Lower Store to the mouth of the Ocklawaha River, that and the area north of that line was available to the whites. To the south of that line was not. He was there at the meeting. The Ocklawaha was specified during that meeting. It's actually mentioned, and John was there, so he knew what the endpoint was. And when they hit the Ocklawaha River, that was Indian territory and was not available to them. And I'm sure he did not want to enter the Indian territory because he was not fond.
Well, that path from Lower Store heading over to Cowpen, I've been very interested in that route. If you look at the maps, and I've also been looking at some of the plants that Bartram talked about, and some of these have very specific kinds of distributions. And there are a couple of pawpaws that give me clues as to where Bartram was traveling through. But they did go probably through the town of Rodman, which wasn't a town then, through by Camp Creek there, and then cross Deep Creek, and then somehow work their way up toward Interlachen and Cowpen Lake. So it's not everything is known yet. Okay, I kept pretty much all of my stuff in chapter 4. And these are the main ingredients for chapter 4. 1, landscapes. Now I chose the word landscape rather than habitat ecosystems, all of these ecological terms because they have very precise meanings. I looked at his descriptions as sort of a broad brushstroke of the kinds of places. Like, for example, how do you have a patch of plants growing in the St. Johns River, and you talk about that, and then the next thing you're talking about are the sandhills that go on for miles and miles. So I chose landscape rather than these other words. Every time I talk to a group about fossil tortoises, my other favorite subject, people ask me, well, how do you name things? What's this hierarchy of names, and how does that all work? So I incorporated a section of the book talking about what is a species, how these species are named, and using Bartram's examples. And a lot of Bartram names that he uses in the book date back to Linnaeus, who was the founder of systematics. So that's addressed in the book. I don't think it's totally boring, but maybe. Have to talk to my wife about that. And then probably the more important thing was an updated list of the plants and animals that they recorded in that area that I just delineated. I didn't worry about what was over at Manatee Springs or Paynes Prairie. I was concerned about here and the river. So there are some of the nuances of our approach. Examples of landscape. Okay, this is a Spartina marsh, Spartina bakeri marsh along the St. Johns River. Thanks to Jim and Carol, they managed to get me there. This is Salt Springs, water coming up out of the ground. That's another landscape that the Bartrams talked about. And the really neat thing is that when you read Bartram's travels or John's diaries, he talks about these kinds of places. And so the title, Through Their Eyes, I incorporate little pieces of their observations as to accompany the descriptions of the broader landscapes. For example, this is about the Bartram's River experience, okay? I painted this last year or 2 years ago.
It's your award-winning painting?
What's that?
Is that the award-winning?
Yeah. But, you know, when he talks about that, this is what I pictured he'd talk about. But here is the Through Their Eyes bit from Travels, page 117, 118. Its entrance and shore within I observed to be a verge with floating lawns of the pistia, which is the water lettuce, and the nymphia, which are the white water lilies, and other aquatic plants. These I knew were excellent haunts for trout. Now, what the hell is trout? I mean, excuse me. What is trout? But in Bartram's idea, that was the largemouth bass. He called them trout. So these are the kind of nuances that I had to sort of try to figure out what in the world he was doing. A couple of companion volumes. This one on the right is actually by Tom Halleck and other authors. And this is Francis Harper's original book in 1958. He published this. He came on the scene, Harper, when there were still wild areas in Florida. He met people who went back into the late 1800s. So he was able to sort of sort out some of the byways and trails that if we tried to do that today, nobody would even know that they were there. So he came at a very fortunate time in the whole Bartram phenomena, and he published this book. This is Francis Harper. His brother was a very, very famous botanist and was actually at the Alabama State Museum. Yeah, and traveled all, and it was through his brother that when Francis was trying to track down the pathway of the Bartrams over into the Mississippi Valley, it was his brother that sort of showed him the way, because his brother really knew that area. Now, there are components of this project that I call research. There are things that people didn't know, and thanks to Dean and Sam and Ken, a lot of the things on the rivers were sorted out. But that path that I was telling you about, that went from the lower store over to Payne's Prairie, there are vagaries. But a very dear friend of mine, Willie Tholosin, who many of you probably know, he's with PLC. He's a fine naturalist, and I posed to him, okay, Willie, where could that campsite have been? What Bartram called Halfway Pond. And he took me to this site here. This is Willie standing there. This is Blue Pond, and you can see it's the right kind of habitats. Why is it important for us to know? Because that's where he described the Florida softshell turtle. That was the first description of that animal, and he is listed as the describer of what was called Trionyx ferox. He described that, and I saw one of those surface while I was standing on the bank with Willie.
There you go. Bartram moment.
Yeah.
Probably the same one.
It could be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Blue Pond, which I think is Halfway Pond. It's a small, clear water pond. Its descriptions fit Bartram's words, a crescent of dark groves, which shaded a rocky grotto, sloping green banks, terminating at a point of flat rocks which projected into the lake. And he also mentions that there were soft shells, alligator, brim, mudfish, and an assortment of other kinds of freshwater fishes. The kicker, one of the puzzles that got to me, and probably to other people trying to do the same kinds of things, what about the flat rocks? There are no rocks in that area. What the heck were they looking at? Well, this is what they were looking at. This is the kaolin mines over in near Interlaken, and you can see it forms a shelf. It's a very dense clay. In fact, the clay is used for pottery and other things. It's pretty much any kind of potter's clay these days has a component of the clay that came out of this hole in the ground. And this is the clay sticking out there at Blue Pond. Now, raise water levels a little bit, and you stand up there, there's that shelf. So this, to me, adds a little bit more validity to Blue Pond being that halfway pond. Okay, let's go to the list of plants and animals. Somewhere my plant got off the track there. But anyway, what I did was enumerated all the plants and animals that he mentions in the journal and in travels, okay? And they used words that may be still in use or names that are not in use. For example, Felix osmunda. Well, that name doesn't mean anything these days. It's actually a, I'm so used to using my computer. But anyway, hey, I'm becoming technological.
There you go.
Anyway, so it's a member of the fern family, and in this case, it's a member of the royal fern family. And Harper thought it was either the cinnamon fern or the royal fern. It could have been either one of them, actually, that they both occur in that area. Dropping down to the gymnosperms, these are the cone-bearing trees. He talks about Cypress disca. Well, that's an old name, and Harper felt that it was either the river cypress or the pond cypress. And remember the difference between the two cypress trees. If you look at the needles, if the needles lie flat like that, it's bald cypress. If they are erect like this, it's pond cypress. In fact, that's where the name ascendens comes from, the Taxodium ascendens, because the needles go up. Okay, so then anywhere he mentions cypress or other plants in that family, I've listed them and tried to do some kind of catalog of the name changes through time and so on. And if I were using the book, I would be reading Tom's translations of the journal and the book, and this name is what would appear there. So it's in bold print. Now I'm going to take the cypress and show a little bit more detail. Whoops, yeah, there it is. Okay, so again, number one is Bartram's text name. Number two, which is here, are Francis Harper's identities and what page. Then my identification is next, and then locations of sightings. So going through the journal and the textbook, they tell you where you are, but I decided to break it down so I'm not rambling on for pages and making the book twice as thick, of dividing up the sightings into the lower St. Johns River, the upper St. Johns River, and also we use the middle St. Johns, and I-Trek is the trek across to Cowpen Lake. So that's how I abbreviated about where they were, where these observations were made. And then the next thing would be Bartram's travels and the page numbers, but it's the page numbers that are in Bartram's journal, not the. Unfortunately, I'm going to make that change if I ever have a chance, but it's has to do going back to the original source, and then I'll put in the most up-to-date taxonomic note, and I show you here that cypress was formerly placed in the cypress family. It's now placed in the cedar family. And WH is Wonderland and Hansen. That was the authority. So that's how I sort of put it all together. And some recommendations for you all with books. Okay, my thought is books are to be used. So use the book, abuse the book. Write in it, underline in it, put in anything that, if you find something that needs to be correcting, correct it in there. And so sometime down the road when something like this happens again, we'll have all those people that can input the real information. And without Dean's map, did you bring any copies of the? They're gone? Oh, wow. His map of the river, it's about this long. It's invaluable and needs to be incorporated. Of course, that map in fragments shows up in the book. Let's see. Anyway, basically that's the message. Have fun with the river, have fun with the book, abuse the book, take it wherever you go, and it'll all dry out if it gets too wet. And we tried to keep the price down so that if you needed to replace it, you could replace it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
You have it Kindle for?
Not yet. They're talking about that. What they want to do is sell out the hardbacks. And I don't know what the run was. They've now sold about 450 of the hardbacks. It's not out in paperback. And so we've been communicating with them about what's next.
That's the most portable.
Yeah, but you don't want to take your computer on.
People who do. They're that technical.
Anyway, any questions, any ideas, any help that you could give me in?
Besides that half pond or what,
where you went searching with Willie, what were some of the hardest parts to figure out where John Bartram was when he was making some?
Okay, so if we make the assumption that Bartram left the store, went over Camp Creek, went through Rodman as Harper suggested, and then of course with the Rodman Pool there, it's a lot different place than it was when they came across. But in fact, when they lowered the water tables in the lake, that stream sort of started flowing again. And so the description that he provides about crossing this creek, which I think is Deep Creek, and the ferns growing along the edge, I've done that dozens of times here in Florida. I mean, there were the royal ferns there was the cinnamon ferns. I mean, it just fit. So then the next question is, okay, you come up the other side, you're heading to Tom's Barbecue, and what happens there? And one of the things that Bartram talks about is this pawpaw. There are like 10 different species, and after I'm done with it with the cell squashers, there may be twice that many. But there is something called the big flowered pawpaw. He pictures it in his book. It has a huge drooping white flower, and it has a sort of a fairly bright green leaf that isn't fuzzy on the underside. And that's Asimina obovata, or the big flowered pawpaw. Another one that occurs in that area is the woolly pawpaw. It also gets a big white flower, but not as big as obovata. The leaves are paler green, and on the underside there is a woolly fuzz, hence the name woolly pawpaw. I have not found them co-occurring in the same place except at Goldhead Branch. I found 2 plants of the woolly there among thousands of the obovata. It tends to be a scrub species of obovata. Well, when you go across 310, and then you cross over to 315 and you're going toward Orange Springs, over on the right-hand side, there's a little road called Hewitt Lake. Yeah. You drive down there a half a block and you're in scrub. And the pawpaw is growing right there by the road is the obovata. I think that he went through that scrub, that's where he saw and described obovata. Because everything to the east of that is the woolly pawpaw. And there's some other pawpaws. There are 2 other pawpaws that occur in that area. Pawpaws are really cool plants. But anyway, so I'm using a lot of extraneous stuff to make a conclusion. Okay, thank you.
I'll tell you a little bit about the conference. And I've got here a slide of, a picture, probably a self-portrait. Some people think it is, of William Bartram, found in one of his letters. I can't tell you exactly where that is, but I think it's in Philadelphia, where that was found. Okay, so from our Bartram Conference website, the Bartram Trail Conference was established in 1976 as part of a bicentennial observance to locate and mark the route of William Bartram across the southeast. And the BTC, Bartram Trail Conference, promotes interest in developing public access to recreational trails, gardens, unique natural areas, culturally significant locations within the corridor of Bartram's route, and to coordinate a regionally unified effort towards that end. And there was a lot put into that back right after '76, and a report, a detailed report, which has a lot of good information in it, but the National Park Service said at the time we didn't qualify. But a lot has happened since then, and between then and now, the Bartram Trail Conference, there's been every 2 years a conference, and there's been a lot of academic goings on and communications and such. But right here, you guys have sparked a start on it again, And I'm hoping that we're going to end up with our trail across the southeast. So, objectives of our Bartram Trail Conference. We're shooting for this natural heritage area, a national recreational trail, a recognition by the National Park Service. And right now we do put roadside markers out there. You pay for them, but we'll do the research and make sure that they've got the right verbiage on them. We encourage the study, preservation, and interpretation of William Bartram heritage, and encourage celebrations like what you've got right here, symposiums. And we do have a biennial meeting of members at some site along the trail. And we had it in 2017 in Baton Rouge, and then 15 was here, and 13 was in Scaly Mountain, North Carolina, and we've had Macon, Georgia, and we did have it in D-Land, I think it was 2009. So each of these sites are important, and you go to these things and you just got a world of things to look at, especially if you bring your book along, and I've got Harper's rendition of it back there on the back. So we try to make it interesting with these conferences, and we've got some folks who are very knowledgeable about Bartram and nature along the areas, and this is off our website. And Sam, you may have this too, but this is the idea to have a corridor as marked here. And you guys can look at that. If like a couple of years ago, I chose to take a route, follow the route across Georgia. And we've got it marked out pretty well on the website where you can actually follow the roads, the dirt roads or whatever, and it takes you to some places that you would never see and you didn't know were there. And you can do that across Alabama too. We've got something going on with that now to mark that, the old federal road. So here's your local relations. Sam Carr is our vice president and board member. Ken and Janice Mahaffey, they are our treasurer. Anyway, they take care of that part, and to me that is the most complicated position in any group. So, thank you. Okay, so as I said, we had our 2015 here, and that was a success, and I learned a lot there. And if you were here, there was a lot of excitement there, and we hope that that's going to continue. So I appreciate what all you've done here towards that. So our next meeting, and I'm working on that now, October 26th, it's going to be at the Alabama State Archives building, which also houses the Museum of Alabama. And I would like to explore colonial Southeast natural history, specifically related to Bartram. And you get into all sorts of things with that, since he was just what they call back then the natural history. He was into all aspects of it, which would be your botanical, your historical, your archaeological, the culture of the people then. And we'll want to talk about what did Bartram see as he traveled through the Creek Nation in 1775, and hopefully we'll get some of you guys to explore the federal road across the state there that went from, well, it's essentially around Augusta down to Mobile. So some of the things you'd see in Alabama, we do have canoe routes marked and some platforms you can spend the night on out in the Tensas Delta. I've done a little of that. And here's my favorite picture. I was looking for things I got in the state archives at Alabama in Montgomery, and this is a stump, a burnt stump. And supposedly, supposedly Bartram, this was the council tree there at Tuckabachie, and near Tallahassee, Alabama. So anyway, that's down in the basement. And is it really that? Well, nobody can say it isn't, and it's marked that way. It's been there a long time. And here's a cannon in the Museum of Alabama, and this was found at Fort Toulouse. And Bartram, I do believe he did talk about abandoned cannon that were there, 2 of them. And so they got them there at the archives. And here, if you get into the book that Catherine Braun and Greg Wassicott put together on Bartram's writings on the Creek Indians, he had a lot of sketches on their culture, what he saw in the towns when he was in Alabama. And that's worth reading if you're interested in that. And this is a diorama of a village they put together at the Museum of Alabama. And this is based upon Bartram, and you can see in the background some of the sketches there related to him. And I thought it was cool. We just had a conference, and we had somebody from Oklahoma who was working up the museum out in Oklahoma City for the Creek Indians. And we had Craig Sheldon, who is was University of Auburn University there in Montgomery, archaeologist, and Catherine Braun. And so the 3 of them, and they went through all these exhibitions, all these little dioramas and things in the museum, and they each talked about what it meant to them, what they had read about it, and how they depicted it here, and to have this person from Oklahoma agree with them or give them some different ideas on what he had seen. And I thought that was pretty cool, and it's best not for me not to say anything, but just to stay back and listen to what's going on there so I don't disturb what's happening. And here's some more beautiful pictures that down along the Federal Road, one of the little state preserves there. These are things Bartram wrote about. He wrote about this when he went on this little side journey to Pensacola, but this is just a few miles from Pensacola. And if you want to become a member, which I would hope you would, you can join. I've got a few little papers in the back there that membership applications there. So it's cheap, and you get a newsletter, and you help support these conferences. And come to Montgomery, October 26th, and we'll spread more of the news with you when we get it planned out a little bit better. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I appreciate the time. Sam, could you tell us about what's happening as to spread our corridor?
Thank you, T.R. I appreciate that.
Can you get out of that there?
Sure. And now, this heritage report is really important. See, in 1979, the Bartram Trail Conference was formed to produce this report. Okay, and so it was done in 1979, and so what became of it? So the conclusions of the report was Bartram was worthy of national recognition. Bartram traveled significant nationally and regionally. Bartram Heritage Report is compatible with the National Heritage Program that it was supposed to appeal to at the time. William Bartram's accomplishments should be promoted, and memorializing Bartram can serve many recreational and educational purposes. So that was the whole idea behind this thing. It's a worthy venture. They also wanted to establish the Bartram Heritage Centers and Heritage Collections. They wanted to create a continuous Bartram Trail. They concluded that was impractical because there's so much area. It's 2,500 miles. And so a lot of the trails actually that he wrote, just like Dick was talking about, they're actually roads now and so forth. So it's not a trail. When you talk about Bartram Trail, it's 2,500 miles long, but it's a lot different. Some of it's waterways, some of it's swamp, some of it are highways now and so forth. So that's what we had to consider. So look at number 8, recreate the experience rather than the exact trail. So that became our thinking here. The identification, registration, and preservation of natural and cultural resource associated with Bartram. Parts of the Bartram Heritage Program best developed by state, county, city, and parish governments. And so that was the idea behind this thing. Okay? So in 1979, this was the Bartram Trail study map. And I know you can't see it, but you're not supposed to. So here it comes down from Philadelphia all the way up into Georgia and down through Florida. They went back up here to Georgia, came across Georgia, Alabama, down to Mobile, Pensacola, out to Louisiana and all that. So that was all, we figured all that mess out back in 1979, okay? And this is what the report, and then the National Park Service, as a result of the Bartram Trails report, produced this piece of work, which we found here, or I found it for the very first time just a year or so ago. And this is actually the trail study, the historical scenic trail study for the Bartram Trail. And they named the states that's involved: Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Now, TR, have you ever seen a Bartram site in Tennessee?
Well, I don't think he went to Tennessee, but he probably.
Neither do we. So we're going to strike that off, okay? So, but there's an actual official document produced by the National Park thing, and their conclusion was to identify the routes. They wanted to identify and analyze the routes and adjacent to them, and all of that good stuff. They wanted to evaluate the characteristics of the routes and determine if they could actually do it as a trail, a scenic historic trail, an area, or what it was. So they did all the work. And the study of Bartram routes found that while the entire route traveled, we couldn't designate it as a trail. There were sections of it that we could designate as a trail. Florida, one of them. And so there are scattered trail segments and so forth. And so the National Park Service has definitive definition, or has definitions on these trails. The Lewis and Clark Trail was going through this at the same time. But they had contiguous trail all the way across. And so that's why the Lewis Clark Trail is a trail. But we're not going to be a trail, we're going to be a corridor. Okay? It's how they define it. Yes, semantics. It's very exactly. The routes traveled by Bartram don't meet the criteria for National Historic Trail, but Bartram travels writings, illustrations with significant contributions to natural science, literature of the area, and they're significant to this present day for the understanding of the southeastern part of the nation during the 18th century, and we all know that. And there are many other natural values adjacent to the Bartram routes and so forth if we extend it as a corridor. Okay, so a lot of stuff attached to it. So, what would it include? Destination of Bartram Heritage Corridor, designation and development of national scenic trails, like we have, designation of Bartram scenic waterways, which we have, Bartram Memorial Highways, which we have, and development designation of Bartram Heritage Centers. Now, when the National Park Service does one of these things, they go state by state. Lewis and Clark has a state center, in Illinois. And you just go across the state. And so the National Park Service builds and staffs these centers, and basically what are these trailheads along all this way. And that's what they've got. So, and then the development and implementation of the interpretive programs and so forth. So that's what it would all include. So what does it look like today? This is the same map that he showed you. The only difference is that all of the orange stuff has already been done. It's already, in other words, those are the maps. Those are the trail markers. The historic trail markers are all the orange ones, and the purple ones are also markers of different type. These are all the Federation of Garden Clubs, National Federation of Garden Club designations, all through here. And it's amazing. And then the blue ones are state designated stuff, and the orange ones are different designations. But that stuff is already here. Isn't that cool? It really is. So what is it really going to look like? And boy, we're not high enough resolution here for you to see. But you can just about see a shaded area that goes all of this. And it's the same map that we had in 1979. But what we've done is we actually put the Bartram sites all along the way. And isn't that amazing? Just look at all of it. It's just really, really amazing. And so that's the idea. So what does it look like here in Florida? Is that fuzzy to me or everybody? It's about it. What does that do? Just trees. So we're coming down Jacksonville, and you see all, and Dean's got all these marks, all these mapped out on the map that he did. But look at all the sites that are designated here in Florida. So when we get the Bartram Trail Heritage Corridor in Florida, it's definitely going to include Palatka. This is where all the cool stuff happens. Never going to forget Clay for that. He was in a meeting that I really stressed with. So that's really cool. So it shows his trek all the way across the Cowpin Lake and to Cuskawilla and all the way out to the Swanee. He named Manatee Springs. The name stuck, and so Bartram actually named Manatee Bones, that where the Indians have been eating them, was all over the place and everything. And then his trip up the Swanee River to Tullahatchee, or whatever the name of that place is, it's the same name, I think, is there. And then he came back, and all of those places are all part of this national corridor. So that's what we'll own here in a couple of years. Isn't that cool? Isn't that really cool to me? It's really special that we'll own all this stuff. And that will be the the Northeast Florida Bartram Trail Heritage Corridor. That's what our plan is. So what's out there already? We got 8 national recreation trails already, 32 other established trails, 17 Bartram routes that TR showed you. The one that's in Alabama, and they've got it in Louisiana now. Mississippi, he went along the coastline, so that is already designated as a route and everything, but it's not designated as a Bartram route. So 120 designated sites, 28 in Georgia, 30 in Florida, and many of the above are public lands, state parks, national parks, and county parks. So the state or the government doesn't have to buy anything. We already own all this good stuff. They don't have to do anything. Won't be any money as far as, and there won't be any eminent domain. None of that stuff applies and all that. So it's just a matter of getting it designated is what it amounts to. So the action plan includes to rewrite the Bartram Heritage Report. We need to begin our state-by-state collaborative support. We've made connection with the Florida Federation of Garden Clubs. That's how this thing also started. The garden club ladies got together and said, Bartram was pretty cool, so all our gardens and everything. So they went and got their husbands to talk to their congressmen and senators and governors, and they said, we probably ought to do this thing. And so the main effort really started in Alabama and Louisiana and here in Florida. Helen Cruikshank, does anybody remember her? And she was the Florida person that got it started and everything. So our governor of Alabama, George Wallace, at the time, calls up all the other 7 governors and said, guys, the women want us to do this thing. So they did. They started congregating and they started forming this thing, formed the Bartram Trail Conference, and that's how this stuff got started, by the ladies in their garden club. So the historical societies are all interested in Bartram because it is our history. And the Audubon societies because of the birds. They're always involved in the Bartram stuff. The Indian tribes. If you read Bartram's travels, and we had the Long Warrior here this week. I hope y'all spent some time with him, especially on the boat ride. Wow, it was really cool. But he stays in the first person all the time, as does our brother Billy back here, and it really was important. But the relationship that Bartram had with the Native Americans was really special, to the point that when Thomas Jefferson got to be president, he actually asked William Bartram to give him a brief on how should the government treat these folks. And if you read what Bartram wrote about it, he said they don't need our religion, they don't need our government, they don't need our laws, they definitely don't need our taxes. Leave them alone. They do all the good stuff, and they have a culture, they have their own way of life and everything like that. He said just leave them alone. Bottom line, if you look at the kiosk down on Palaka, it tells them very clearly they have no need of European culture. And so that was Bartram's comment to that. So we're going to get those folks involved with it because they're involved with the whole thing, and other national and regional groups. We need to connect the National Land Subcommittee. Now we have the list of who's on that now and everything, and so the way that this thing has to happen is going to be literally an act of Congress, which means we've got to start somewhere. And we've made contact with 3 congressmen now, 1 in the state of Florida, and so we need to gather. And so the conference wants to gather a state inventory of sites, trails, parks, cultural sites. Florida's handled, don't worry about it, we don't have to do that. We need to gather a portfolio of Bartram articles. That, again, the Bartram Trail Conference will do. So the question is, what can you do? Okay? What can you do? Well, I got a few things you can do. You can help us gather some of the data and stuff. And by data, what we need to do is who are these collaborative groups? Who are they, and how do we connect with them? You know, I've tried to connect with the Indian tribes. I'm not having any success at all. You know, maybe some of you know who that is. And also, that's what we kind of need. We need some input from people that know stuff, because we don't know stuff. And I guess I'm the chairman in the state of Florida for the effort here. And also, I'm floundering. I struggle with putting on a little festival. So we need to connect with the collaborative groups, the Audubon Society here, and all those folks know this stuff. We're connected with the Garden Club here in Florida, and all, but we need to connect with others. We need people to volunteer to help us contact our congressional representatives. And we've already written and spoken to Ted Yoho and to Mr. Nelson, but you know, the election's coming up, so that's in flux and so forth. But that's what we have to do. We have to be in touch with these folks, because they're going to be the ones that carry the message to Washington. They're the only ones that can actually get us to the next level. And so we need, if y'all know how to get a hold of these folks, I sure would need you to raise your hand, or as we say in the Bartram world, step into the boat. Because we need your help, okay? We really do. So if any of you want to volunteer to help us, please see me after the meeting, and I'd appreciate it. It's really been a good, go ahead, Janice.
Sam,
yes, ma'am.
women, an apology.
Yeah.
About women in the garden club ask their husbands to contact their contact.
They did.
Women have their own voice.
That's true. That's true. I can only tell you what the lady in Louisiana told me. But yes, I understand. I understand. But I'll tell you, that lady was 97 years old, and she's explaining this to us out in the Bartram Trail Conference in Louisiana. Remember, TR? It was just absolutely delightful. And to find out, huh?
I think it's Polly Williams.
Polly Williams, exactly her. And she got up and read us the riot act. It was just absolutely, she told us all about the story and all, and she said, bottom line, the way it got stopped was politics. And she was adamant about it, wasn't she? Because what had happened is they got this whole movement started and got right to the edge of it, and then the election of 1980 or 1982, it's just like we're fixing to go through now. Everybody switched jobs, and the people that were pushing the Bartram Trail weren't around anymore, and that's where it died. Because the report actually said we need to fund $300,000 to get this thing started, everything like that. Nobody ever did anything with it. Isn't it amazing? So we need to get somebody new and in there that'll follow through with it. But this has been an incredible week. I'd like to describe it for you. It started on Sunday afternoon when the tent people showed up, and that was on September the 23rd. And they put up the tents and all that kind of stuff. People like the Long Warrior and Billy Bartram and Joe Wiggins, they all showed up and everything. And then Monday shows up, and Emily Floor with the St. John's River Keeper had organized this whole thing. And sure enough, at 9:45, we got everything ready. Everything is set up, and all we were looking for is that big yellow school bus. And it never showed up. And they had forgot. They said that they thought that it was on Wednesday instead of Monday. And so those poor kids in Crescent City were sitting on the curb out there in that heat, waiting for their school bus to arrive. And so an hour and 10 minutes later, it did show up, and they finally did come over here. And so I was on the very first boat ride that we took that day. The Riverkeeper actually paid for all of these kids to go on the boat ride. Wow. And yeah, they took 15 boat rides. That was really something. Well, it was actually more than that, 15 boat rides. No, because we had short, that's right. So we get the first group of children onto the bus, right, onto the boat. Now, if you know anything about Middleton Burney Elementary School, the primary people that go there are Hispanic. And these are second graders, and they all speak English, and they all speak Spanish. And so here it was just delightful to see them all getting on, very polite and everything, everybody sitting down, got their life jackets on and everything. And so then we asked the question, who sitting here today have never been on a boat ride? There were 21 kids and 19 kids raised their hand. That was the very first trip. Imagine. And 15 trips later, how many first timers we got out onto our beautiful St. Johns River? They know the name Puggy so well now. It's awesome. They heard it 4 times during the day. They got to meet Billy Bartram, just absolutely mesmerized them. And all in the description for Billy and his award, he deserves that award, absolutely, because he is an educator and he can keep a kid's attention and teach them how to call turkeys like no one else. Really did a fantastic job. And the kids were great. We only had one discipline problem, and that was okay, and all, but we got them in, we got them out, and it worked out great. And then Friday night came along. We had the frolic on the river. There at the St. Johns River Center, and we had a packed house. I don't know how many, did anybody ever count, Ken? I lost count at like 2, and that was one. I was counting grogs, I'm sorry. But it was really fun. We had, Bobby Payne was there, and we had county commissioners were there, and city officials were there, and Rich Zerncy from our school board was there, and all of that was really important. Pardon me?
The mayor was there.
And the mayor was there, all of that, and it really was. Mary Lawson gave the longest talk. Why? This was Mary Lawson's vision 30 years ago when she first took office. And so seeing this happen and seeing those kids on that riverboat, boy, how she is beaming. She is loving life. So that was really fun. We had a great time thanks to the Rotary Club doing that. And then Saturday comes along, and Bob and Diane Taylor sponsored the Passport to the Past, and what a great deal this was. The kids walk around all day long with their passport and getting them stamped at all the stations, and they're just having so much fun. It was really great. We estimate we had about 1,500 people show up. We were hoping for 3,000, but you know, it was a hot day. I have to say that.
We had no rain.
Yes, right. But we had no rain. That's right. And our river boats were filled up. We couldn't take any more. We had standing room only. In fact, as Karen Chadwick came out with her boat, she filled her boat 4 times, which is great, and she took the overflow. And so all of the river boat tours were full. Dean's paddles, both of those were what I call full. Anything over 10 is a trouble. And both days on his paddles, we had people paddling, and we had 16 the first day or something.
12 the first day.
Okay.
16 if you count the kayak rentals. That
Right.
4 rentals.
Right. Okay.
We had a full load, which was 12,
Right.
and we had 11 this morning.
Exactly. Fantastic. And most of those people, not really from Putnam
No.
County. Same thing with the boat folks.
Yeah.
They were from other places. You know, Putnam County folks don't like to do this stuff.
Yeah, they
Just
came
amazing.
a long way to come out.
Exactly, they did. And just like some of you. How many are you not from Putnam County here? Just so.
St. Augustine.
That's good. That's good. So bottom line is, it all ended last night or today with this symposium, and we appreciate everybody coming out. The Bartram Trail Committee, you know, I think we found our niche. This is about all we're going to do, and all except work with the Bartram Trail Conference to try to get this corridor done and that kind of stuff. But you know, when we've got designated as a national recreational trail, you don't get any better than that. Sorry, there's nothing else beyond that, and except to be part of this larger thing. So it's that's where we are. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank Ken and Janice for setting us up here, and thank BJ for the food and the setup and beautiful tables back there. Funny story about BJ. First time BJ helped us out at Putnam Blue Edge and Trails, we were having a paddle Florida trip, and we were paddling from Salt Springs all the way to Palatka, camping out 3 nights along the way. And so BJ got wind of it, and she said, I'll set up the river center for the luncheon. And we go, okay, this sounds wonderful. And so we had barbecue or something out in the parking lot there. And so here are these hot, sweaty paddlers. They have paddled a total that day of about 15 miles, okay? and crossed the river and got here to Palatka, and they're at the end of their trip and all, and we wanted to have a nice meal for them, and so we shuttled them up to where they were having like a buffet there, and BJ had decorated the interior thing. So I walked up to the paddlers, and they're lined up on the curb. They're sitting on the curb eating, and all, and they go, and I said, why aren't you eating inside? It's air conditioned, this and the other. He said, there's a wedding going on. It was so beautiful in there. They do. We don't belong here. So, thank you for your art, BJ. You're wonderful. You really are. Buy a book, buy a t-shirt, and all that money goes directly to the Bartram Trail Committee here in Palatka County. Okay? Thank you.